On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a digital marketer in life sciences. And my guest today is Elizabeth Chabe. She is the founder of High Touch Group. And she's an expert in science marketing with a distinguished background in spanning research, universities, national labs, and technology transfer offices. And I just wanted to welcome you with that, Elizabeth.
Thanks for having me, Don. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And we have a common friend, Chris Connor, as well. I'm sure he will tune in knowing that both of us are here. So I'm sure
Awesome. Shout out to Chris.
I'm sure he'll check it out. Yeah. So would you mind just telling me a little bit about yourself, your background, and what is it that brought you to life science marketing?
Sure. It's a fairly circuit. I wasn't, like waking up at 5 years old thinking I'm going to go market life science innovations or anything like that. I wish I could track it back to some aha moments in my childhood. But I started my first business pretty young. I was 9, and I started my second when I was 12, my next when I was 15, my next when I was 18. And so I've always had an entrepreneurial streak. And as a child, I was raised mostly in the 90s. I was born in 85, if that dates me a little bit for some of the younger listeners, sorry. But I don't think entrepreneurship education was as popular, at least not in my rural town in Maine where I grew up. So nobody said, hey, you really like starting businesses. Maybe we should get you into some entrepreneurship classes or teach you how to write a business plan. There wasn't really that support network. So I sort of was just doing this in the background. And I always thought that I was going to grow up to be the president of the United States. That's what I told everyone for years. And I think I was still saying that until undergrad. I was a poli-sci major for a little while. Anyway, over time, I did go and get an MBA. I didn't study the sciences in undergrad. I did take some science classes in civil engineering, primarily mechanical engineering and others. But over time, essentially what happened is I sort of merged this ability to communicate around technical topics with my passion for entrepreneurship. And this sort of combined into working with technology in a university lab and helping it spin out of that lab and start small companies, get in the first venture funding rounds or friends and family angel rounds into these organizations, helping them get to break even through some university partnerships and that sort of thing. And that led me down this path of, I actually do enjoy working in the sciences. I do enjoy working in engineering. I just don't enjoy being at the bench. And that was probably the closest to an aha moment for me. I didn't quite understand that there was this entrepreneurship side of the sciences. It wasn't something I was exposed to. And so that I've actually taken to heart quite a lot. And I try to talk with young people as much as possible about different opportunities in the sciences. You don't have to necessarily be doing the science yourself to be working in that environment and supporting that ecosystem. But I got my start in the life sciences while working for the Jackson Lab. That was really my first exposure. Prior to that, I was working for the University of Maine Advanced Composite Center, which applied composite materials to structural applications primarily. And I was a program manager there in a variety of Department of Defense, National Science Foundation, Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, and other funded programs. And at the Jackson Lab, I ran strategic marketing initiatives for a variety of programs, including the first commercial CRISPR program launch and a couple of other fun projects around humanized mouse models and some other fun stuff.
Very good. I was going to ask you, where did marketing come in? But it sounds like it got woven in there in a part of your time at the Jackson Lab as well.
Yeah, I think that marketing we've kind of made it into a discipline, right? But at the end of the day, it's essentially being a good communicator, being a strategic communicator, understanding what your goals are, how you can work with the other team that you're negotiating with, whether that's a funder or a strategic partner of some sort or a customer. And it's kind of basic communication just applied maybe to deliverables that we talk about in a marketing context. But if you're a strong communicator and you understand business strategy, marketing should be easy. Right? Because that's the foundation. And I think we make it into, oh, but you have to understand these tools and all of these little, all of these different metrics and KPIs. And that's true, but that's sort of just like 10% of it. That's not the 80 or 90% that I think is most important. So I think I was doing marketing all along. I just didn't necessarily call it that for a little while.
I think it's funny because I tell people all the time, sort of my approach to marketing, as well as more the operation side of things, making sure that things get done, and that your message is communicated, kind of the execution piece. And it's interesting to me to hear, similar sort of approaches, like, hey, look, there are pieces of this and a lot of things that a lot of us do. The matter of fact is that, we have to figure out how to clearly communicate that overall for people as
Absolutely.
well.
Absolutely. It's good insight.
So, how did your experiences in working with research universities, national labs, and technology transfer offices approach your, shape your approach with marketing?
So I don't want to poo-poo it necessarily because I learned a lot, but I think that those environments taught me how slow and political and often siloed the process of technology commercialization can be, and also how incredibly important our universities and national labs are to our scientific infrastructure in the United States, especially. I mean, it's the backbone. It's where the majority of even beyond IP. I mean, obviously, the majority of IP starts there as well and not in the private sector, but it's also where most of the research infrastructure, the hard infrastructure, the advanced telescopes, and the next generation laboratories where the next generation of equipment lives, that's in our national labs and that's in our universities. And I don't think, unless you've really worked in those environments, it can be difficult to appreciate just how intricate that infrastructure is and how important it is to the scientific ecosystem and the economy just in general in the United States. But it also helped me, I think, gain something that every young person must gain, especially if you are ambitious in your career, and that is a little bit of patience, because those work environments can be very slow and political and siloed. You have to sort of learn how to communicate differently, how to have a little bit of patience, how to speak the language of regulators, IT, the funders that you're working with, the communications departments at universities, which are very different from communications departments within laboratories that are trying to get, innovations out into the world. And so it really teaches you to be a translator of sorts, someone who can help researchers shape their work into something that's fundable, that's licensable, that's scalable. And I don't think that I would have the same perspective that I do today on that if I hadn't worked in those environments first. So I'm always grateful for those experiences, but also will never go back to an academic environment because I do prefer the pace of industry, frankly.
Yeah, it's interesting to mix a little bit of the pace with also the approach, right? So obviously the approach in academia for a long time, and who knows, maybe given the current administration, maybe some things shift as well, with this. But I mean, the whole sort of approach for a lot of these things in the early stages is making sure that you have grants to support the research that, sort of carry things forward. And eventually there becomes this inflection point where you need alternate money, and you can no longer go to the same set of individuals that you have used in the past, and now you need to transition to more, I guess, venture capital and other methods of getting funding. And that sort of, I think, comes with an expectation that, hey, look, we don't want this thing to take longer than it has to. It can't cost more than, what I think it should cost, et cetera. So,
Yes.
it does come with a pace change, but also, I think the funding change helps to drive that as well, is my belief.
It can, especially if you have a scientist a founder who gets that, right? Some are very, especially you see a lot of postdocs and grad students in labs who are actually really the best targets for kind of carrying their faculty sponsors research out of the lab. So often it might be done with NSF, STTR or SBIR funding to set up pilot scale manufacturing, basically transition from the lab into the real world. And that kind of provides a nice bridge. If you can handle, an SBIR or STTR program, and then you bring in your friends and family and angels round, and then maybe you start pitching some pre-seed or seed funders on the VC side. And very often you can find that personality type within your lab. It just often isn't always the same, professor who runs the lab itself. And when they think it is, sometimes that's when there can be an issue because, if you've been brought up in the pace of academia and if you speak the language of the NIH and the NSF, that's very different than speaking the language of VC. And to your point, hitting those early stage milestones so that you can get your follow-on funding is challenging. And if you don't understand that business context and if you don't live and breathe it every day, it can be a difficult transition. So very often I see the grad student who has carried out a bulk of the research as part of their grad experience be the right C-level to sort of lead the company as they transition.
Very good. So, as you look at the journey in founding and leading High Touch Group, what inspired you to start your own company?
So I founded High Touch primarily because that market of helping faculty and their grad students transition from lab scale to commercial sector is difficult to navigate. Tech transfer offices at universities are usually very good with the details of here's how we're going to make this IP licensable. Here's the standard agreement that we have with the inventors and so on. But they're not always they're really not designed to support the business planning process, the venture pitch process, or really any of the early stage marketing that these companies really need. And so kind of got my start moonlighting, essentially helping faculty who I was friends with at these national labs and at the university where I was working stage their first websites, get their first decks going. I had worked on this a lot in my professional life, helping the businesses that were coming out, that were spinning out of this particular lab. And so I had a process that I thought was unique, right? Because I didn't know. I was like 25. I thought it was this wonderful, unique process. Really, it was just sort of the same process everybody was using to develop pitch decks and tell stories and about early stage technology and that sort of thing. But I was lucky. I was working with some great founders, had some early successes, and that allowed me to spin out of the lab, I guess, myself and bring on a lot of the staff that I had worked with at the laboratory for 6 or 7 years. So they were my own staff there, and I brought them to High Touch Group, and many of them still work with me today. Shout out to Kip Palmer, our lead graphic designer. He's been with me since he was an undergraduate student at the University of Maine, I think 15 years ago or something like that, 16 years ago. So yeah, no, but it really was eye-opening to just see that there really is a gap because most of these smaller companies, they can't afford to hire a large agency, and there really aren't a lot of agencies that work with these smaller companies and give them the deep time that you really need to help them spin out. If you're in marketing and you don't understand the technology, for example, that you're trying to market, that's going to be a big gap. And so we basically saw that there was a big gap in the markets between agencies that understand the science and want to do sort of those deep dives with founders. Our model has since evolved quite a lot. So we no longer work with a lot of early stage founders. We're more at once you've gotten your Series A or your Series B and you're looking for acquisition or something like that. That's more our typical client profile today. But 15, 16 years ago, it was those founder scientists taking their first steps out of the lab.
Very good. So tell me a little bit more about your services. What does High Touch Group offer, and then what sets you apart?
Sure. So we act essentially as an embedded marketing department. So our strategists, I'm one of them for a couple of different industries that we work in. I'm essentially, as that strategist, I essentially function as a chief marketing officer role in our companies. So we're often working in those companies. Maybe they've gotten their Series B, and they know that their milestones that they have to hit per their funders are pretty aggressive, and that their next stage is either a pretty big raise for their C round or an acquisition. That would be sort of a typical profile. Or you're a mom and pop, services company. Maybe you're a life sciences tools company. You were started 20 years ago. You're beloved by a small set of customers that have been with you forever. But for the founder to really take a step back or sell the company, have some sort of desirable exits, there really has to be a growth strategy in place. So we help develop that growth strategy, and then we execute it end to end. So our team it includes PhD level copywriters and graphic designers, web developers, app developers, and so we essentially pick 12 to 15 accounts per year. Many of them are with us for 6-7 years at a time, but we select them. So we do very little. Hey, come work with High Touch Group, where we are not like a logo shop trying to get in every business. We pick 12 to 15 a year, and we work very deeply with those accounts. We're talking multiple meetings a week, deep dives with the founders. We understand the technology. We're doing a lot of the content developments, everything from technical application notes and white papers to podcast production. So we do a lot for a small number of accounts, and I really like that model, right? Because it feeds my curiosity. I get to geek out with all my favorite people. So it's a lot of fun.
That's good. And then how do you measure success with your clients?
Usually money. I mean, usually they're coming to us, right? Because they're trying to hit a milestone. Usually that's a financial milestone. So the biggest is just the return on the investment. Are they seeing the growth that they want? Are they getting that next funding round? Are they getting those acquisition offers? The other piece really is very often, in order to really, especially if you're going for that C round or you're going for an acquisition in a crowded space, you're also looking for some brand positioning that you just have never had. And in order to position your brand well, it's not just a pretty logo and color scheme and some interesting typography. It's a lot more than that. It's deep business strategy. It's understanding where is your sweet spot in the market. And so we help our clients find that sweet spot. Very often they know what it should be, and we help them get closer to it. And really, that is the essence of brand strategy. So we do a lot of that. They might already have a brand, they might already have a logo, they might already have some happy clients, but we help really develop their thought leadership position, for example, is sort of the typical positioning they're going for. And we do that very well, and primarily through deep content work, as well as placements on panels at important shows that are critical to their industry, abstract submissions for key scientific conferences, whatever that particular account needs to really show where their brand is in the market and send out the right signals so that they can increase their customer base, deepen their relationships with existing customers, and then ultimately hit those milestones we're targeting. But money is sort of the ultimate, right? Because very often we're dealing with very often we're dealing with private equity owned companies, or companies that are being acquired by private equity, or that have once you're at that B or C level in the venture space in life sciences, the investors get quite sophisticated, right? So you're no longer dealing with sort of the small regional VCs. You're dealing with more of the power players, and so it's also a lot of deep strategy work on the funder side as well. So that's been a lot of fun. And when I'm not doing High Touch, I'm on a venture capital board as well, the main venture fund, and so I get to kind of put my VC hat on more often during my day job than maybe I used to.
Nice. Very good. And let's talk a little bit about your book, The Giant's Ladder. So tell me about the book and what prompted you to write the book.
Sure. So I wrote The Giant's Ladder because I was really tired of seeing brilliant people stall out in their careers, and usually around this struggle to communicate the value of their work. So I also no longer, unfortunately, get to work with a lot of my favorite founders, which are the very early stage founders who are just at the beginning stages of spinning out their research into some sort of commercial entity. And I miss that. I miss it a lot. But a lot of those companies fail. They're very early stage. So it's difficult to build a business on top of working with companies that have a high likelihood of failure. It's not great for me, right? So I can no longer work with them day to day, unfortunately, but I love working with them. And so I try all the time to get in front of that audience. I do a lot of work advising different university groups. But the book I was sort of designed to take the place of me in my first 3 to 6 months of engagement with a founder scientist who really has no idea what marketing is and kind of thinks, oh, it's the commercial gloss that you put on a product to make people want to buy it, or it's the packaging design, or it's something that it's a lie that you tell people so they like you more. Like scientists especially are very, very weird about marketing. Like they don't always think that it's a great thing. And so I designed this book to be essentially a practical strategic roadmap for those scientists who need a quick primer to get their commercialization efforts underway so they can start speaking the same language that their early stage funders are speaking, that their maybe their first marketing hire needs to speak. And my goal is really for readers to come away with a little bit more clarity on how to position their innovations for real world success. So, whether that's funding, customer adoption, scaling, but it's supposed to sort of not replace me, but kind of replace me for the first 3 to 6 months is the idea.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that about early startups because I was telling my team, I said I know that primarily we have to focus similarly on larger companies, and so because of that, I wanted to still keep somewhat of a touch, and so I said, look, why don't we pick a couple, and maybe we do this every year where we sort of open up the doors for a couple of companies that we think have not only good potential, but also really good people, teams that we want to work with. And so, essentially we've done that this past year and it looks like we'll continue that practice into the future. Who knows how many
Awesome.
companies we could take on. But yeah, it's completely a gamble. And you just don't know exactly how things are going to turn out. And you're seeing a lot of them struggle right now, but it puts us closer to that as well. And I think it's important to kind of understand the earlier stage struggles too in your journey. So
It's true. It's true.
yeah. So whenever it comes to the complex process of commercializing innovations, how do you help companies? And then what are some of the common pitfalls that you see as well?
You know, I think that the biggest place we like to focus first is always around just clarity of product or service. I'm just going to use the word product because it's easier to say. But who is the product for? What problem does it solve? And you might not be surprised because you're in this world, but the average listener might be surprised that very often technologies are invented without knowing who they're for, without understanding what problem they solve. And that means that either you are sort of in this process of having to create a market for a product, create demand that doesn't exist. And that's very difficult to do. So we try really hard not to do that because, especially for a small company without a lot of resources, that's basically impossible. So we really focus there because often it turns out that this technology was invented to solve a problem. It just happened to be very niche. And a lot of the time the founder scientist will say, well, nobody's really interested in that. This is just a home brew I made in my lab, but somebody told me somebody else wanted to buy it. And so I just thought I could scale it and, yada, yada. That's how I started the company. But that story usually has some bits of truth in it, right? So even if you developed some piece of software or some sort of homebrew reagents in your laboratory, very often you were solving a problem. You were just solving it for a very small audience, an audience of one or however many are in your particular lab space. And so we spent a lot of time focusing there. What is the problem? Who are you solving it for? And then once we've identified that, we build from there with messaging, with some market validation, go to market strategy if the product hasn't launched, or retconning the go to market strategy if there was a product launch failure. And the biggest failures I see is really not understanding that products are made to solve problems for specific people. And if you don't understand that, you really don't have a product yet, you have an invention, and so you really do have to figure that out. So we that's a common pitfall. We tend not to take clients in the space if they don't have a good product and some audience understanding. But the biggest pitfall I see outside of that is skipping audience research, underestimating the importance of usability of your product, and sort of assuming that the science will sell itself, right? So I got a publication in the New England Journal of Medicine, or I got a publication in Lancet, so therefore everybody's going to want to buy it, right? And that's just not true. So I think that there are a lot of assumptions that if you don't have a business strategy background, you might make about your invention, thinking that it's a product before it is, and thinking that if you get a publication slot, that the customer will come, and that you can ignore some of the usability features that maybe you didn't need when you were using this homebrew in your lab, but in order to transport it, for example, to a customer, maybe you are going to need to think about these things. So those overlooked sort of early product clarity pieces, I think, are some of the common pitfalls and things we try to prioritize.
Yeah, there are two things that I would take from that, and it's funny because Y Combinator says the same thing. I mean, one of their biggest criticisms of entrepreneurs overall is that you have a problem searching for a solution, or you have a solution searching for a problem. I got that backwards. But yeah, I mean, if you read a lot of their publications and look at their pitch prep and things like that. I mean, Y Combinator has called this out repeatedly as well, that a lot of people show up and say, hey, look, I've got the perfect solution. I'm trying to figure out what problem this solves. and
Yes,
essentially nobody wants to invest in that. So such an important piece as well. And then
it's true.
kind of the secondary piece that I took away as well is that just this whole concept of bringing multiple skill sets, I guess, would be the example of, to the clients that you have as well. Because I think, and I see the same thing in my business as well, that, look, I mean, you're essentially buying, time for 5 resources. You're not necessarily, buying my time, or, another person on my team's time. And that's a hard concept, I know, for a lot of people to understand. And it's been a struggle, of ours overall to just say, hey, look, I mean, if you put all these skills into one person, you're not going to get a very good resource. But if I could, sort of pass you along to people in my team that have these skills, these are things that you need, and we just sort of need you to come along in the journey as well, so that you have a really solid plan going forward.
It's true. It's true. I think the staffing of these marketing programs is pretty critical, right? Because even within marketing, there are so many subdisciplines, and if we're really going to put the power of an agency behind an early stage company, then they need that, right? They need the strategy, they need the design, they need the marketing operations side, and if these things are done well early on, then it really does set them up for success, not just those early commercial milestones like getting a product launched and understanding product market fit better and maybe getting those early sales, but also just giving them a framework that they can work within for future product launches. You know, that founding team learns so much from those early successes and failures. And I think a good marketing agency really supports that learning process as well. So I think that's a great point.
So, in terms of the clients that you have, can you share an example of a successful marketing campaign that you've had, and what made it successful?
Yeah. So we've had many campaigns over the years. One of my favorite programs that we run out of any of them is the Advanced Lateral Flow Conference. It's a conference that we've put on for the last 7 or so years, usually in the San Diego area. This year it's in La Jolla. As you can imagine, just me saying those words, lateral flow, that's a very niche technology within the diagnostic space. It's primarily for rapid test point of care diagnostics. But this event used to be essentially a workshop for lateral flow. So teaching people who attend how to make their first lateral flow devices, maybe covering some advanced topics on lateral flow development. But over the years, and in part because of the vision of the clients that hosts the event, and in part because of what I've added and High Touch Group as a whole has added to this event, it's gone from a workshop to a scientific symposium. It's now 400 attendees. We have panelists from across the industry talking about the hottest topics in rapid point of care testing. And this is such an important field because, as you know, most COVID tests, for example, were lateral flow based formats. Pregnancy tests are sort of the common lateral flow tests that people know and use, but really they're used across multiple industries, from water testing, bioprocessing, of course, all sorts of infectious and chronic diseases, companion diagnostics. So there's so much innovation going on that we took this show about 6 or 7 years ago, and today, through a series of programs on the content development side, so getting in the right speakers, developing the right agendas, through the organizing committee, putting an awards program together for lifetime achievements and an innovation award for new technologies in the lateral flow space. The scope of the show has really just broadened. There's an exhibit hall. There's 2 full days of main stage technical sessions, just 2 evening events that are these big fun parties with everybody in the industry, from supply chain leaders to inventors of very specific tests to diagnostic strategics like large diagnostic companies that are looking to acquire niche technologies that they're no longer inventing in house, right? So and then now we even have a lot of private equity and venture capital representation at the show, as well as people from NIH and BARDA and FDA. So it's really just changed a lot, right? From mostly startups who are getting very practical information to this much larger conference. So, of course, this has done a lot to build the client's position in the lateral flow diagnostic space, the host organization, as well as the conference itself is now really the premier event in the space. And so that was a marketing program, but as you can see, that was a business strategy that was executed with a lot of marketing support. But it's not a traditional, oh, we had this idea for a campaign and built a microsite and did some pushes on social and did some media buys. Like, yeah, we do that too. But I think when I think about my successes, it's like, what did we do to really change how an industry thinks about itself? right?
Mhm.
The lateral flow industry didn't exist 7 years ago. I mean, it existed, but people didn't refer to themselves as I'm from the lateral flow industry, right? This is the gathering point for an entire industry of suppliers and inventors and strategics. And just being part of that growth has been really amazing from a career perspective. So I think that that's probably one of our most successful campaigns, just because it's strategic, as well as obviously there's a lot on the execution side that has to happen with marketing any sort of event. So always a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are some of the most innovative projects or trends that you're currently seeing inside of life sciences marketing space?
I'm really interested in how diagnostics is going to translate to in-home use of technologies. So, there's a lot of wearables tech right now. I'm seeing a lot of pitches for different diagnostics products that are essentially some cross between wearable or like hospital in the home, a lab in the home. I think that that's an interesting concept, and I know you're nodding your head because I'm sure you've seen this for years as well. And they're not always getting funded. And I'm seeing technology that's really, really good. A few years ago, obviously, we had the Theranos debacle, but today, I mean, you can do a lot with a few drops of blood in a pretty small containerized system for at home use. And I'm seeing these demoed a lot, but they're not necessarily getting the funding. And I don't, in my conversations with investors on this topic, a lot of them are still sort of shy because of the Theranos thing. Maybe that's changing. I hear that there's her boyfriend or husband or something is starting a diagnostics company while
Wow.
she's in jail. So I don't know. Maybe the world is warming back up to this idea. But I think that diagnostics in a home use environment, I think, is going to be just incredibly life changing for a lot of people, especially if you're monitoring chronic illness, especially if you live in a rural area where trips to medical facilities might take you an hour. I'm from a rural area. I'm from Maine originally, and there are hospitals and clinics that are being shut down all the time. And so I think it's going to be more and more difficult as hospital infrastructure goes away for people in rural areas to receive the healthcare that they need and that they've grown accustomed to. And so these at home laboratories, essentially, that could live in your bathroom and that are the size of a shoebox or smaller, could really, I think, change just how we think about healthcare and wellness in the United States and more broadly globally.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because I feel like everything with COVID was more or less, kind of a lot of our big, at least everybody more or less wound up having to take a COVID test at home and do it themselves and things like that. And then whether it's that or you have a small diagnostic device that sits on a counter that can run a couple of different tests whenever you don't feel well, and those answers could go back. I mean, wouldn't that be powerful as well? I think about my father. At one point, he had it wasn't a pacemaker. It was the other. There's another device that goes in your chest, but essentially they would do the same thing. It was telehealth, and they would, constantly, monitor how is his heart doing, and did they need to adjust something or do something different for his care? And yeah, I mean, having these little devices or having a device that, could do that would be pretty powerful, I think, for all of us when you can't necessarily make it to the hospital every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What's the greatest piece of leadership advice that you've ever received, and how's it influenced your career?
I don't know if it's the greatest piece of leadership advice I've ever received, but when I worked at the Composite Center at UMaine, there was on the wall this. It stayed with me, so maybe it's the greatest. I don't know. There on the wall, just literally printed out on computer paper and frames above the entrance, was this phrase: "None of us is as smart as all of us." And I really love that because it's true. I've always been a strong proponent of team and making sure that you have the right people on the bus. They might not always be in the right seats, but right, when it's the right person. And in the organization or on a strategic team leading some sort of initiative, And I think the same way about clients too. If you have a relationship with a client where it is truly collaborative and they believe, hey, we're working with you because none of us is as smart as all of us working together towards this common goal, and you are a collaborator, not a vendor. That makes a huge difference in the quality of the work that we're able to produce for clients. And this is really why we've gone from letting people just knock on our door and say, hey, you want to respond to this RFP or do you want to come work for us? Unless it is somebody who is doing something very interesting, or a person, a C leader who I have a personal relationship with, who I just know, okay, well, this is their next thing, and I want to be there to help this grow. We don't take those meetings, and it's because I really want to work in those collaborative relationships. And so I don't know if it's the best leadership advice, but it's definitely stayed with me, and it's still on the wall at that composite center, 20, 25 years later. And I know that other people I've had conversations with alums, out at conferences that we just, meet up and that sort of thing, and we talk about this phrase. And so and we still say it to each other, like if somebody if somebody got advice from their boss or something, we'll say none of us is as smart as all of us, and it's sort of an inside joke for people who have worked there as well. But the other one is silly, or maybe. And I used to use this with all of my teams, and I've since stopped doing it because younger people now haven't watched the Bill and Ted movies. I don't know. But be excellent to each other.
Mm,
We are only on this planet for a short amount of time, and we don't know how long. So just be nice, be great. If you have an opportunity to provide some free advice to somebody who's maybe struggling or can't afford you, provide the free advice. You've got 30 minutes. You can have a cup of coffee with somebody, like that relationship building that you're doing. It's not meant to necessarily be reciprocal, but you're
right.
putting something good into the world. They're going to remember that. And so anyway, usually when I say this, I also like to say that if you're a student or you are a founder and you don't have funding right now and you're struggling, feel free to email inquiries at elizabethchabe.com, and somebody on my team will send you a free PDF copy of The Giant's Ladder. But happy to answer questions for people, if they have them and they're really struggling. I try to go on shows like this because it's an easier way to reach more people than those one-on-one conversations. But I think if more people took to heart, be excellent to each other, we would have a much friendlier business environment. And I think the right technology would tend to float to the top more often.
Absolutely. What inspires you?
Big ideas, audacious ideas. And especially if they are big, audacious ideas that solve tangible problems. I'm drawn to people who want to change the world in quiet but radical ways. Not everybody doesn't have to invent an iPhone, right, or something like that, right? There are very niche technologies that have changed the world, that change the world every single day, and they don't necessarily change the world for a lot of people. But if you're the one person who needs that low cost malaria test today, and you have it and it's readily available at your corner pharmacy in some low or middle income country where you live, then you just changed that inventor, that team just changed a world for a very particular population. And I think that that's incredibly important. So I tend to look for clients who are changing the world in quiet ways, but in very important ones.
Well, thank you for sharing that. What concerns you?
Oh, well, the current administration, I'll just, be honest, concerns me quite a lot. We're seeing the largest federal funding cut to the sciences ever, since the founding of the National Science Foundation. And I am a huge proponent of federal investment in research infrastructure and in research programs. It's the backbone of our economy. It's so incredibly important. I mean, we can point to GPS, GIS, LiDAR. There's so many things that we use every day that are just baked into our phones that we rely on, that came out of academia, that came out of federally funded research, the internet. I mean, literally everything. And so to cut that funding is just going to devastate us economically. And I don't mean that because of job loss in the short term. I think those scientists are going to find great careers working for for-profit companies where IP is going to be siloed and possibly shelved for very long times, if ever commercialized, or be sucked out into other countries, unfortunately, that are doing a great job with recruiting our scientists who are losing their jobs in the States. So I think that this is just pretty devastating for the innovation ecosystem. And it's I think that that's a pretty that's a big concern. But that funding crisis stems from a growing gap between science and society. We're seeing a breakdown in trust. We saw this during the pandemic. We've seen it post-pandemic. And this is because scientists really aren't trained to communicate. We used to have this program at the National Science Foundation around training scientists to communicate. That was sort of taken over by AAAS, and now it's like a $600 boring webinar. Sorry, AAAS, but it is that you can buy. But it's expensive for the average person. You're going to need if you're a grad student, you're not going to pay for that yourself. You're going to need somebody to fund it. It's no longer this live workshop that goes around to different universities and teaches cohorts of scientists to communicate. I took that training years and years and years ago. It was wonderful. And programs like that teach scientists to communicate, not just with funders, not just with VCs. Yes, that's important. You need to be able to raise money for your startup. You need to be able to write successful grants. But it's so important that people in your community understand what your lab does, why it's vital, the types of technologies that you're developing, and that you're not scary, that you're not, some mad scientist in a lab cooking up ways to destroy society, that it's very much the opposite. You probably just really like birds, or you just really are into, this particular shape that you from like a biochemistry class that has just stuck in your brain, right? So, I mean, it's not a scary thing, but so many people in the general society are scared of science. And so I think that more scientists need to run for office. They need to get on school boards. They need to go volunteer in their communities, give tours to every girl and Boy Scout troop and class you possibly can of your labs. Get out into the community, show the world that scientists aren't scary, that you're out there helping people every day. And so we can kind of close that gap between science and society.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Last question. What excites you?
A lot of things. This weekend, I'm working on an oil painting, so I'm pretty excited about that personally. But I think generally, I'm really excited about the next generation of diagnostic products. Like I said, the ones that are going to be in our homes, I think are going to be especially life-changing for so many of us. I'm also pretty excited about a ton of technology that's coming out of China, honestly, that's just transforming how laboratory operations will be in the next 10 years when that tech finally makes it over here. And I'm just really excited to help the people behind the scenes, help them succeed, and not just in the lab, but out there in the real world. So excited about a lot of things.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success podcast. I really appreciated our conversation, and it was great to hear about what you're working on in High Touch Group and all of your excitement around what is to come yet in life sciences. So thanks a lot for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Don. This was fun.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it. And last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.